introduction. That's very kind of you. So one other point I want to make here is that this, different folks have different perspectives on coaching. And, I would argue that there's not necessarily a right or wrong view of coaching. What is an agile coach? But for me, as a member of the IC Agile organization, I'm committed to espousing the view from IC Agile, which comes from a number of coaches, including, of course, Lisa Adkins and many other well-known coaches. And so I think that's a good framework to follow. And so this material is based on the IC Agile learning objectives. And much of the material is actually taken from my ICP ACC accredited workshop that's accredited through them. I'm an IC Agile authorized instructor for 3 courses, one through myself and 3 through another organization that I sometimes teach through. I'm also a IC Agile member organization. Okay, so with that, so when you come to this series, you're going to see a couple of slides over and over and over again. So I apologize for that, but that's just for new folks, just a level set, and there won't be a lot of common slides. What is an Agile coach? So I'll just let you read it there if you haven't already. It's pretty straightforward, and the focus is on coaching. And coaching in this context means from professional coaching, ICF, the International Coaching Federation. That's a specific form of coaching, mentoring, teaching, and facilitating. And this wall of text here is, it's a lot, but just to say that when you have the hat on for a hat of an Agile coach on from the IC Agile perspective, you're either coaching, mentoring, teaching, or facilitating. And there's nothing wrong with going outside of that, but then from that perspective, you'd be sort of consulting, right? So if somebody says, hey, I really need your help here, could you just do it? Okay, great, that's Agile consulting, wouldn't necessarily be coaching. All right, so, and like we said, there will be a recording of this available later, so don't feel like you have to write this all down, but there it is. And a little bit more specifically, mind map to go further, that the skills that come from professional coaching follow a coaching flow. They involve things like questions, often called powerful questions. And if you want to learn a lot more about coaching in general, I recommend the book Coactive Coaching. That's basically the book that started coaching in general, outside of Agile, but just coaching in general. You've probably heard of life coaching, wellness coaching, that kind of thing. So coaching in general. All right. So to the point for today, we're going to cover 3 topics, the first of which is coaching to the Agile Manifesto. Now, as we're going through this, what I would want you to think about is to open up to the idea that there may be some things in here that are new, even though we're going to cover some familiar territory. So when you see some of this stuff, look for what's new, not necessarily like, okay, yes, I know the Agile Manifesto. As we all do, all right? So one of the things that I want to do to level set this is that when we talk about the Agile Manifesto, one of the reasons it's important is its relationship to the methodologies that we use. And there's some here that are not particularly well used these days, but like crystal methodologies or DSDM, but Scrum and XP are still, definitely very alive and kicking. And what happened with the Agile Manifesto, those principles and values were distilled from these methodologies. And not just these methodologies, but if you look at the 17 people that showed up, many of them were associated with these, and they had this sort of concept of, wow, there's something going on here that's different, not sure quite what it is. And what they realized that they had in common were these principles and values that then became to be known as the Agile Manifesto. So the reason that I'm bringing this up is that for me, and I think what's very important for us as Agile coaches, is that instead of coaching to a methodology, we want to try to coach to the Agile Manifesto. Manifesto. And I think that may seem self-evident, but I'm going to go a little into it in a little bit more depth. So let's take a look at Scrum, for instance. where does Scrum come from? Well, it comes from, it can be, it comes from before the manifesto, but it can be mapped to those principles and values that were always present there. So this is just one example. You might map it differently, and I'm sure this is not comprehensive, but it's just to give an idea that, for instance, the guidance of having a shippable increment every 1 to 4 weeks is associated with the principles and values of working software as the primary measure of progress, deliver working software frequently, and probably more as well. But that's just an idea, an example. Or if you look at regular intervals, the team reflects on how to become more effective and tunes and adjusts its behavior accordingly. You can see that there are a whole bunch of things in Scrum that are supporting that idea, right? So from the Agile Manifesto's perspective, the actual components of Scrum are not there, they're not there just for their own sake. They're there to support the principles and values. Now, it did come about, it's kind of chicken and egg, right? So Scrum came before the Agile Manifesto, but I would say that those principles and values were always there. And that's why they came up with the things in Scrum, right? So it's kind of like looking retroactively at it. Okay. So let me ask you, let me give you an example, and I want you to think about, and you can give your thoughts in the chat. This may be a trick question, so I'm not necessarily looking for an expected answer, but it doesn't matter. There's no wrong answer. So I'd love to get your thoughts on what methodology is this. So we have a team, they're cross-functional, they all sit together in a common area. They have a card wall there with their process up there. The board is updated frequently. There's sort of a hum of conversation. Sometimes people move off to a quieter area, but then they come back. You can see the members helping each other spontaneously. The stories are moving from next to in production, or on the board here, I guess it would be from to do to deploy. There is a product owner, there is no stand-up, and there's no retro, but you can see, while you're standing there, there's some emergency that comes up. The whole team swarms on it, and then the emergency is over. Then you see there's a conflict boiling between two members, and somebody talks about their working agreement, and then they go through their resolution protocol, and they're back happy and working again. So what methodology would you say that is? What would you call that methodology? So we'll just get any thoughts in the chat here that you might have. And remember, there's no wrong answer. Give you a moment to think about that. Okay, so one person says Scrum Ban. Yeah, it could be Scrum Ban. So I just put this together randomly. So it may overlap with Scrum Ban. What I was going for, okay, technically not Scrum, but possibly effectively Agile, as long as they're actively communicating outside of meetings. Right, yeah, okay. So that's the idea here, is that it could be, you could call it a number of things, excuse me, but really the point is that everything in here matches something in the Agile Manifesto. And the reason that I like to talk about this is the most recent example for me, and some of you have heard this before, was a person that I was talking to that was complaining that there was a person in her stand-ups that wasn't standing up. And when I asked, okay, for context, is it a high-performing team? She said, yeah, it's the poster child for Agile in the company. But anyway, so they won't stand up in the stand-up. And I was thinking, I think this person is coaching to the methodology rather than coaching to Agile, right? So while Scrum is a collection of practices that happen to be Agile, it is not the only collection of practices that happen to be Agile. So that's basically the point that I wanted to make there. And to sort of go just a little bit deeper, I have this is what I like. You might like the manifesto purely, or you have some other way to look at this. But this is sort of my perspective of what's in the Agile Manifesto rewritten to be a little bit more approachable in quick conversations. But of course, the original source material is the best for any in-depth conversation. So if we look at, we're thinking about, okay, here's a problem that comes up. Instead of thinking, is this the right way to do it in Scrum? We can be thinking of it in terms of principles and values, right? So I'm just going to scroll through here and focus on the particular highlights. So for instance, people and interactions, are there problems with people and interactions? If there are, then let's look at that as opposed to, is somebody standing up or not? Another example, sufficient documentation, right? So if somebody's arguing about, this isn't fully documented. Well, is it a story that we're working on this iteration? Right, so that would be a way to coach to the manifesto. Make sure, if you see that people are working on things that are not directly tied to something valued, okay, that's an issue. Are they able to deliver frequently? Is there ongoing collaboration? Right, so these can all be signals, and you can go back to the manifesto and look. If something's going on and you're not quite sure what it is, you can look at these things and think, is it one of these? Rather than, are they following Scaled Agile right? Are they following Scrum right? What have you? Are they able to change their plans at any time? Or if the product owner comes and says, we should change something, does the team freak out? If they do freak out, why are they freaking out? Because that's a fundamental principle or value. So I see this a lot. This is a fundamental issue. If the team is not able to demonstrate a usable fraction, if they say things like, oh, well, the code is checked in, or we're making progress on that, that is actually a problem, regardless of whether or not it shows up in the sprint review or planning or a stand-up. It doesn't matter where it shows up. That's a problem in general. Are solutions emerging? Is the team self-organizing? Now, a lot of these are pretty straightforward, but the connection I want to make here is that when you feel something's wrong, you can always go back to the manifesto to think about, what is it? Why is it wrong? Is it wrong because they're not following the methodology? In which case, if they're not following a methodology, but they are being agile, then I would say being agile would trump following the methodology. Are they doing the simplest thing? Not simplistic, but simplest thing. Is there technical excellence? Are they working at a good pace? Are they trying to be face-to-face? And are they reflecting and taking action? Right, so that's just a reminder of how useful the Agile Manifesto can be when we're coaching. So lastly on that topic, there are a lot of measures out there for how agile a team is. And this one, which I like, does not focus on methodology. You'll see that there's really no methodology stuff in here, except the possible exception of definition of done. So if people are not standing up in meetings, but the time between when a customer asks for something and the customer can use it in production is constantly shrinking, while customer involvement is going up and quality is staying where it is or going up, and morale is high or medium and going up, then does it really matter if they're standing up or not? Things are improving. Now, if you get to a point where the only issue is, does somebody stand up or not stand up in a meeting, and that has some impact on any of these, okay, great, let's talk about that. But as long as things are improving, I'm not sure that's really a big deal. Okay, so systems view. What is systems view? I was just having a conversation with a coach yesterday, and they were talking about how the problem on this team was these two individuals. And it seemed pretty clear. One individual was not ready with the product vision. One individual just wanted to sort of go off and research. And it looked like everything was being held up by these two people. But it turned out that there were two actors not in the room that were actually the issue. There was an architect which was encouraging the developer to focus on research versus producing value. And there was another person in the product organization that was trying to figure out whether or not to augment the product person or refocus the product person. So that's what was actually going on, and conversations with those two people yielded some results that look like they're going to end up in a better place. So the point here is systems view. We've got all these relationships in a system between people, between the system, the overall organization. And when we look at one of these interactions, one of these people or one of these relationships between two people, it might be the problem with that person or the relationship between two people. Or if we think of the team as its own person, right? So we've got all these people within, the head of a person. It might be the team itself that's a problem. Now, what does that mean? That sounds like some woo-woo stuff. But what it really means is that a team has an identity, right? So here in Boston, we root on the Red Sox and the Patriots. And when I say Red Sox and Patriots, you know what I'm talking about. There's a sort of mental image there. And if you're in the Boston area and you say New York Yankees, well, that is a whole nother image. We prefer to talk about the best team, the Boston Red Sox, obviously. So every team can have an identity, and that identity is wrapped up in the values of that team, their team agreement, their name, who they're composed of, how well they get along, their goals, their product goals. That's a team identity. And so the problem actually might be, when you're seeing a problem, it may be that the team agreement is not actually an agreement that everybody on the team agrees with. It could be that there's a person on the team that doesn't want to be working on the stuff in the sprint goal or the product vision, right? So problems can come from everywhere, and we want to look at it from a systems perspective. Now, as a coach, the way to view yourself as part of the team is a little bit removed, right? So there's the team as a person, and if you think of yourself as a team member, you're likely going to be thought of as a team member. And it's not bad to have good relationships with the team. But for instance, another coach I was working with there were problems on the team, and the team asked if a facilitator could be brought in to run the retrospective. And so the interesting thing there is that that team doesn't have a scrum master, so it would be more likely that either the coach would be the facilitator or somebody on the team would stand in as the facilitator, but they asked somebody else. And so what it kind of came down to was that team was seeing the coach as more of a member, right? So you want to be careful of that. You want to think of yourself as being outside of the team. So let's move on to mentoring. Now, very often when we think of mentoring, I know when I think of mentoring, we think, okay, we have a mentor relationship. Maybe you're an expert on something and somebody else is learning, and they want to see how you do things. And so you would show them how to do the work. Then they would do the work. You'd give them feedback and advice, and then eventually, they're off on their own. So mentoring in the IC Agile perspective is a little bit different, though it still falls under that umbrella. But the idea is that from this perspective, as an Agile coach, when you're mentoring, you're talking about interacting with somebody that's already had the teaching. So not a brand new product owner, that would be more teaching, but maybe somebody that's writing stories on their own now. They're doing well as a product owner, but they're new, and from time to time, they really need some advice. And so if, as an Agile coach in this example, you've been a product owner in the past, that's fantastic. If you haven't, then you want to be really careful in giving your advice, because if you haven't been in that role. So what you can say is, here's my experience. So the basic idea here is that if you're going to be mentoring a role, you want to make sure that you're experienced in that role. If not, it's good to find somebody that can act as that person's mentor and partner, and that person would partner with you in coordinating efforts around working with that person. Even in that case, to find a mentor for somebody, let's stick with a product owner, you need to be able to identify who's a good product owner and who's not, right? So I'm not going to go into that in detail, but as an example, you might see one product owner who has gone to, certified product owner class, and that's kind of it, but they still think like a product manager. So you might not want to hook them up with that person. But then there's another person that was a product manager, but always loved to deal with the team, is always there, is good at explaining things so that the team understands, oh, I see why we want 2 buttons there. I see why that's useful to our customers, even though I might not find it valuable. So being able to discern between, who would be a good partner for somebody that needs a mentor is important. So typical roles would be Scrum Master, Agile Coach, Product Owner, Agile Manager, and then technical roles. And I think most of us have been in, one of those roles before, so we can be a good mentor there. And, if you've gravitated towards being an Agile Coach, likely you know how to determine whether or not somebody's a good Scrum Master, Coach, Product Owner, Manager, or technical person. But if there's one of those where you're not clear what makes a good Agile architect, you might say, well, I'm not sure I can really help you with that. Right? So you want to be clear. So the idea here in general is before you offer your expertise, you want to make sure that you articulate it so that the other person can make a good decision. Like, do I actually want to take this person's advice or not? What makes this person credible as an expert that I might want some mentoring advice from. So make sure that before you render an opinion and you offer expertise, that you've articulated your expertise. Or it looks like the person is asking for some advice or could use some advice. So articulate the expertise. Then offer. So just because you're an expert doesn't mean you should necessarily offer. You can say, okay, here's my expertise. Would you like it? Yes, I would like it. Okay, great. So now you know what the basis for that is. You've asked for it. So now I'm going to give you some advice. And then the last thing here is to be sure that in the end, it's the coachee who chooses. So what does that mean? So if I say something like, okay, good question. Here's what you should do. Now what have I done? So whatever advice I give the person, if the person doesn't take it, they may feel a little self-conscious, like, ooh, I better not go talk to that coach again because I'm going to have to tell him I didn't take his advice. And he said that was what I should do, but I didn't do it. Right? So you want to avoid things like should, would, need to. You want to say, here's something I've seen work in the past. And in your heart, if it's okay that the person doesn't follow your advice, then they will be able to see that. And then if they don't take the advice and they have a question in the future, they'll feel comfortable coming back to you. So that's a very important ingredient. Now, to make it really, straightforward, just think about it in the other perspective. You go to somebody, you ask their advice, they give you advice, and you think, that's not relevant. But they were very passionate that was exactly what you should do. Like I was talking to somebody about repainting my deck, and they said, you must use stain. Do not use paint. So I did end up using stain, but I didn't use the type of stain that they recommended because I didn't like that, the color that would come with that. And then when I brought it up with that person, they seemed kind of incensed that I had not followed exactly to the letter their advice. So consider it from the other direction. Okay, so now we're going to practice, and in the chat you can give your perspective. And again, this is not a right-wrong thing. This is just a way to, see if what I'm saying, sort of matches up with your expectation, if it makes sense, and then we can talk, further about whatever. All right, so let's imagine you're an Agile coach, and so for most of us, that's not going to be too difficult. And the scenario is there's a new team, and they say they don't have enough time for manual testing at the end of the sprint. They also say they're having a hard time creating stories of just 1 to 2 days of effort. And, collectively, whether they send a representative or you're at a retro or whatever, they ask for your advice. Okay, and let's imagine that you've articulated your expertise, offered, and yes, they want it. Okay, so I'm going to give you a couple of potential responses, and you let me know what you think of it, and then I will show the answer that I have here, and then we can discuss that answer. So for guidelines, try to always choose something that leaves the decision with the coachee And, from my perspective, the best advice is advice that aids the coachee in making their own decision. And in order, I would say the first best thing is to provide a small bit of relevant information. So, you see a little bit of a hole in their decision making. There's some information they don't know. And so you don't have to go as far as giving examples. You don't have to give a resource. You give this little bit of information. They go, oh, okay. So now here's what I'm going to do. Thanks very much. Or if it's really, really complicated, but you happen to know that there's a resource that they can go look up and take a look at and learn more, or there's a decision-making tool that helps with that decision, then you can offer them that, and they take it or not. And that's going to basically, so then it's focused on them making the decision, absorbing the information, and that's always best. Lastly, there may be, some little nuance, and they're like, I've done this before. I think I've got all the information. I've got lots of resources. This is something that, I've spent a fair amount of time, but I know that you have done this in more situations than I have. Can you think of any examples that might really help me here? Right. So that's sort of the last thing that you want to do. And again, when you're giving these examples, you want to make sure that you're saying, here's something that I saw work in the past, or, this reminds me of the time that we did something similar and it didn't work out too well. But you always want to couch it so that you're not saying, that this is what you should do or what you shouldn't do. Let the other person make the decision. So avoid advocating. All right, so here we go. First example, you say in the scenario, you should try splitting by test scenario. Okay, what do folks think about that? Is that within the guidelines? Is that good advice or not so good advice? What do you think? Okay, one person says bad advice. Why is it bad advice? And by the way, here, a little nuance is that it may be advice that's good, but provided in a bad way. Yeah, so the issue here is that splitting by test scenarios is great advice, but you're telling them what to do. You're telling them what to do. Okay, so let's try the next one here. You're advocating. So you say, manual testing is a terrible practice. You should switch to automated testing. That may be a little bit of a giveaway based on the previous one, actually. But what do you think? Same answer. Yep, absolutely. It is the same answer. The other thing about this one is the word terrible. Is it a terrible practice? Maybe it's the right thing to do in the circumstances. Using the word terrible there is actually judging what's being done. And you want to try to avoid that because, you may have a manual tester there that's been their life. They think it's fantastic. They're like, gee, I give this my all. You're telling me that's terrible? I don't feel so good now. So, moving to automation may be a good idea, but you don't want to judge what they're currently doing. Okay, so advocating. Next, story. You say stories only have to be small enough to fit into the iteration. What would you say about that one? All right, so this is good advice, and yes, it matches up with the first example. So it's a small bit of information. So somehow the team has gotten the concept of maybe a well-meaning coach said, you should really have stories that are 1 to 2 days of effort. And while that in and of itself is actually a good guidance, if the team is new and they have a hard time, describing work for the iteration that is smaller than a single story, they have one story for the entire team for the entire iteration, and for them that's progress. If they can fit one story that the whole team is working on within an iteration, that's great. They don't have to kill themselves to get down to 1 to 2 days of effort. So that may be information that's kind of enlightening for them. And of course, you wouldn't want to say that that's fantastic forever, but if it gets them moving forward, then that's good advice. Right, and so the thought is an even better answer would be to lead them to resources on story splitting. That's true. That said, it may be that they had already gotten the story to be small enough to fit into the iteration, and what you're doing is helping them not feel like it has to be even smaller. Right, so definitely a lot of nuance there. All right. I think we just gave that one away, so I'm going to skip. So if you were to give them a link to a story splitting mini book, because maybe you can tell from them that they have really emotionally become attached to the idea of getting stories down to 1 to 2 days, and that from their perspective, that's what they want to do. So you're trying to enable that. So that would be good, and that would be giving them a resource. And again, this is very nuanced, but this is just to sort of give a flavor of mentoring from the IC Agile perspective. Okay, well, that's our talk for today. And in case you haven't been pummeled with this information from all sides already, I'll be doing some certified Agile coaching workshops, the ICP ACC through IC Agile. And if you do early bird and use the code, it's $9.95, and it's available in Woburn, Mass, November 3rd to 4th, and then there's another opportunity 7th and 8th, and then there's also in Dallas the 4th and 5th. And it's all the information is on Eventbrite. There'll be more coming up. We've got a lot of interest from other folks. I'm talking to somebody from San Diego soon, and we're going to be doing one in Toronto, so stay tuned. And it looks like actually the November dates are a little soon for a number of people, so we're likely going to be doing a follow-up in January. So if you're interested in that, feel free to reach out to me and let me know, and I'll keep you tuned in. And just a little bit more about the workshop. It's definitely a unique offering. It's unique in a couple of ways. It's 2 days of in-person and 1 day of virtual. There's also some homework for it. But that means that if you're flying, you only have to deal with 2 nights of hotel accommodations, and it's only 2 days away from work. There's a whole bunch of coaching tools that you can take away and use with your teams. And also, it gives you a deep dive into coaching with practice, with demos, feedback. 2/3, while I think I'm fantastic, me talking all the time is not the best use of, it's not the best way to learn. So 2/3 of the workshop is experiential. There's also access to a coaching circle for ongoing development, and more details are at Eventbrite. Okay, so with that, we'll move to Q&A. So if you have any questions, just go ahead and put them in the chat. And it can be on any topic, doesn't matter. It doesn't have to be restricted to just the 3 that we talked about. But let's see if we have any questions here. All right, so we've got our first question. Is it important to communicate to the coachee which mode you are in? I don't think it's important to, well, it's a great question. And I think what this highlights is it's not so much that you want to say, hey, I'm taking off my coaching hat. I mean, you certainly can. And I've done that before, or I'm putting on my teaching hat or facilitation hat or whatever. But I think what's important is that when you're transitioning into one of these modes, there are specific things that you want to do as you transition in. So if somebody comes up to you in the hallway and they say, I hear you're an Agile coach, and I've got a question for you. It's good to interject in there, hey, wow, that does sound like an issue that really needs to be dealt with, and I think I can help with that. But before we go too far down that path, this is my first time sort of interacting with you on this, and I'd just like to see if there's some guidelines that you'd want to follow when I'm coaching with you. How would you like that to work? Do you want me to interrupt you when I feel like I've sort of got what you're talking about? What's important to you in our interaction, right? So starting that coaching conversation, how you start the coaching conversation is important. Then if while you're interacting with a person you think, it's pretty clear that this person has never heard of what a retrospective actually is, and they're missing that, and it's pretty clear. So maybe I need to sort of move over into teaching and ask the person. And so in moving to teaching, you might ask, hey, it seems to me like there's a concept here from Scrum that you guys aren't following. Would you like to know more about that? And then especially so in mentoring. So you might be talking about retrospectives, and it's really clear that they haven't heard of other formats. And so you could say, hey, there are actually other formats here. Would you like to learn more about it? So moving into mentoring would be, articulating your expertise, offering your expertise. So I would say it's not so much saying which mode are you in, but if you switch to a mode where it's good to establish some ground rules or to follow a particular protocol, that you would want to do that. And if that didn't quite hit the question that you were asking, let me know. I'm happy to elaborate. Right, establishing a work agreement and new engagements. Now, it's not always possible, right? So if somebody comes up to you and their hair is clearly on fire and you have a bucket of water, then saying, okay, you know what, before I put out that fire, let me just talk to you about the content of this water and, the angle that I'm going to throw, maybe it'd be just better to throw the bucket of water on the hair on fire. So you want to use discretion there, but where you can, and you might say, hey, this is our first time meeting. It looks like you're in kind of a hurry. In general, I like to set up some ground rules, but what can I do to help? And the next time we interact, maybe we'll have a little bit more time to get to know each other, right? So you can definitely do that. Okay. What other questions do you have? Okay, so there's a question here. In the systems view, you talked about the issue may not be with a particular person, but what if it's really clear that it is that person? Okay, actually that really gets to the rub of that issue. I think what makes that challenging is when we feel we know that it really is that person, that's when it's hardest to realize that it may still not be that person. You might be thinking, oh, that person is really cantankerous and whatever. Okay, I knew a technical writer who was a curmudgeon and very cantankerous. And I very often thought when I was first getting to know the person that, wow, they were just really hard to get along with. But what I realized was that was just their personality. The things that they were bringing up were completely legitimate, right? So sometimes we can conflate the circumstance, the personality with the issue, right? Or the content over delivery. And sometimes the delivery might be hard to get through, but if we can focus on the content, what's the actual issue that's coming up here, and where is that coming from? Why is this person so cantankerous today, whereas they weren't cantankerous tomorrow? So that's part of the nuance of looking at things from a systems perspective. Now, it may be that when you go and look, no, it really is that person. I know there was a person on one team that I was working with where they really just were what people call an ungeller. And we knew that we had made the right decision. That was a company that I was part of, actually, and I was part of that decision. When we made the decision to let the person go, we'd given them every chance, every opportunity, and when we let them go, it wasn't a week later that team that they were on turned into a super high performing team. So it was kind of clear afterwards that person really was where that particular problem was coming from. But if you don't search around for what might be the issue in the system, and that's where the problem is, you can definitely make the other mistake, which I have made, whereas you think the problem is with the issue, the issue is with the person, but in fact it was the system. So there was a person that we thought was the problem because they kept writing code that didn't perform well, but actually the problem was they weren't getting feedback on a regular basis. But live and learn, I guess. All right, so we do still have time for questions, but I haven't seen a question come in a bit here, so I guess we can wrap up. But while we're wrapping up, if you have another question, then just feel free to ping, and we'll go back to answering the question, and then we'll wrap up. So I guess from my perspective, I just want to say thank you to everybody for coming. And I have re-engaged with my blog, which is currently hosted on damonpool.blogspot.com. And then just to make it interesting, there's a B in my name for the Eventbrite events. I just noticed that earlier. Definitely going to be coming out with a new website that combines the information. But and don't forget the upcoming events. And I think with that, that's pretty much it. Hope to see you on Thursday, next Thursday, with the topics next week. And thank you very much for participating.
Thanks, everybody.